In 1962 rural Pennsylvania, 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell becomes trapped beneath the collapsed beams of an old barn during a severe storm. Jacob Yoder, a towering Amish man known for his strength and few words, discovers her while searching for his lost cattle. As he works to free her, he makes an unexpected statement that will echo through both their lives: "In time you'll give me sons." What begins as a child's rescue transforms into a decade-spanning story of two people from different worlds, bound by fate, faith, and an unspoken promise that neither fully understands until life brings them full circle in the most unexpected way. The thunder cracked like God himself was splitting wood overhead. 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell pressed her small hands against her ears, but nothing could block out the sound of the world tearing itself apart outside the Hendersons' old barn. She shouldn't have been there. Mama had told her to come straight home from school, but the shortcut through the Henderson property saved 15 minutes, and the storm had rolled in faster than anyone expected. The abandoned barn, with its weathered red walls and sagging roof, had seemed like salvation when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Now, huddled in the corner between moldy hay bales and rusted farm equipment, Sarah wished she'd taken the long way home. The wind screamed through the gaps in the walls, making the entire structure groan like a living thing in pain. Sarah clutched her school bag to her chest, her arithmetic homework getting crumpled against her yellow raincoat. Miss Tiz would be upset about the wrinkled papers, but that seemed like such a small worry now. Another thunderclap, closer this time. The barn shuddered. Sarah's eyes darted to the door, calculating whether she could make it home through the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the world outside into a grey blur. She could barely see the fence posts, 20 feet away. Then she heard it, a sound that made her stomach drop like she'd missed a step going downstairs. It started as a low creaking, like the noise her grandfather's rocking chair made, but deeper, angrier. Sarah looked up just as a shower of dust and splinters rained down from above. The beam was massive, a central support that had probably held the barn's weight for decades. Sarah saw it start to bow in the middle, saw the wood splinter and crack, but her legs wouldn't move. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body stayed frozen, a deer caught in headlights that came from above, instead of ahead. The beam snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. Sarah finally found her voice and screamed as the roof caved in. She threw herself sideways, trying to roll under the old tractor, but she wasn't fast enough. The edge of the falling beam caught her legs, and she went down hard. Pain shot through her ankle as wooden planks and shingles crashed around her, creating a cage of splintered wood and bent nails. When the dust settled and the terrible crashing stopped, Sarah found herself trapped. The beam lay across her lower legs, not crushing, but pinning her effectively to the dirt floor. Above her, a section of roof had formed a small pocket of space, keeping the worst of the debris from crushing her completely. Rain poured through the new holes in what remained of the roof, soaking her within seconds. "Help!" Sarah's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, choked by dust and fear. She tried again, louder. "Help me! Someone help me!" But who would hear her? The Hendersons had moved away 3 months ago. The nearest occupied farm was the Yoder place, and that was almost a mile away. No one would be out in this storm. No one would come looking for her until she didn't come home. And by then, Sarah tried not to think about by then. She pushed against the beam with her free leg, but it didn't budge. Her trapped ankle throbbed with each heartbeat. The rain was coming harder now, turning the dirt floor to mud. Cold water pooled around her, seeping through her clothes. Time lost meaning in the semi-darkness of her wooden prison. It could have been minutes or hours. Sarah couldn't tell. Her throat grew raw from calling for help. Her tears mixed with the rain on her face. She thought about her mother, probably starting to worry now. About her father, still at the factory, not knowing his daughter was trapped like an animal in a hunter's snare. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. Sarah could hear other parts of the barn giving way, crashes and groans that made her flinch and squeeze her eyes shut. How long before the rest of it came down? How long before her little pocket of safety collapsed? That's when she heard it, a different sound cutting through the storm. Rhythmic, purposeful, footsteps. Heavy boots, squelching through mud, getting closer. "Here," Sarah screamed, with renewed desperation. "I'm in here. Help me." The footsteps stopped. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought she'd imagined them. Then a shadow fell across one of the gaps in the debris. "Is someone there?" The voice was deep, accented in a way Sarah recognized. Pennsylvania Dutch. One of the Amish. "Yes, yes, I'm trapped. Please help me." The shadow moved, and suddenly Sarah could see him through a gap in the wreckage. He was the biggest man she'd ever seen, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the entire gap. His black hat and coat were soaked through, and his beard was dark with rain. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Calm, steady, like still water. "Stay calm, child," he said, already moving debris with hands the size of dinner plates. "I am Jacob Yoder. What is your name?" "Sarah," she managed through chattering teeth. "Sarah Mitchell. The beam, it's on my legs." Jacob nodded once economically and continued working. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, carefully shifting wreckage, testing each piece before moving it to make sure nothing else would fall. Sarah watched him work, mesmerized by the methodical way he cleared a path toward her. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, as he worked. "My ankle," Sarah said. "It hurts, and I'm cold." "Shah, the cold is not good. But soon you will be free." He reached the main beam and paused, studying it like a puzzle. Sarah could see him calculating, those dark eyes taking in angles and weights. Then, without warning, he positioned himself at one end of the beam and lifted. Sarah had seen her father and uncle struggle to move furniture. She'd watched movers strain with heavy boxes, but she'd never seen anyone lift the way Jacob Yoder lifted. It wasn't just strength, it was certainty. He knew the beam would move because he willed it to move, and so it did. "Can you pull yourself out?" he asked, his voice showing no strain despite the massive weight he was holding. Sarah didn't need to be asked twice. She scrambled backward, dragging her injured ankle until she was clear. Jacob lowered the beam carefully, then turned to her. For a moment they just looked at each other. The massive Amish man and the small English girl, rain streaming down on both of them through the ruined roof. Then Jacob knelt beside her, his movements gentle despite his size. "Let me see," he said, carefully examining her ankle. His hands were surprisingly warm against her cold skin. "Not broken, I think. Twisted only." "You are lucky." "Lucky," Sarah laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "I'm trapped in a collapsed barn in a storm." The corner of Jacob's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Jar, but you are alive, and I found you. God provides." He stood and held out his hand. "Come. We must get you somewhere safe. This barn will not stand much longer." Sarah took his hand, marveling at how hers disappeared entirely within his grasp. He lifted her as easily as her father lifted a sack of flour, cradling her against his chest. She should have felt scared, being carried by a stranger, but something about Jacob Yoder made her feel safer than she'd felt since the storm began. They were almost to the barn door when he stopped suddenly. Sarah felt him tense, his arms tightening protectively around her. She followed his gaze and gasped. Another section of the roof was giving way directly above the exit. Jacob didn't hesitate. He spun, shielding Sarah with his body, and lunged for a gap in the opposite wall behind them. Tons of wood and shingles crashed down where they'd been standing seconds before. They burst through the weakened wall in a shower of splinters, out into the full fury of the storm. Rain hit them like a physical force. The wind tried to tear Jacob's hat from his head, but he didn't slow down, didn't stumble. He walked through the storm like it was a gentle spring shower. Sarah protected in his arms. That's when he said it, looking down at her with those impossibly calm eyes, rain streaming down his bearded face. Jacob Yoder spoke words that would echo through Sarah's dreams for years to come. In time you'll give me sons. Before Sarah could process what he'd said, before she could ask what he meant, lightning split the sky directly overhead. The flash was blinding, the thunder immediate and deafening. Sarah buried her face against Jacob's coat, and when she looked up again, they were approaching a small shelter she hadn't noticed before. An equipment shed, still standing despite the storm. Jacob shouldered the door open and set her down gently on a bench inside. It was dry here, blessedly dry, though they could hear the storm raging outside. "What did you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "What you said about sons." Jacob was checking her ankle again, his face unreadable. "Did I say something? The storm is loud. Perhaps you misheard." But Sarah knew she hadn't misheard. The words rang in her head, clear as church bells. She wanted to press him, to ask again, but something in his manner suggested the subject was closed. "We wait here," he said instead. "When the storm passes, I will take you home. Your parents will be worried." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain hammer the roof. Sarah stole glances at her rescuer. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe in his early 20s. His hands, so powerful when lifting the beam, were gentle now as he fashioned a makeshift splint for her ankle from supplies in the shed. "Why were you out in the storm?" Sarah finally asked. "Looking for cattle," Jacob replied. "They scattered when the storm came. Foolish beasts. But they are my responsibility." He paused, then added, "It seems God had other plans for my search." "You think God wanted you to find me?" Jacob's dark eyes met hers. "I think God's plans are not for us to understand, only to follow." Something about the way he said it made Sarah shiver, though the shed was warm enough. The storm lasted another hour. They waited it out, mostly in silence, though Jacob did teach her a few words in Pennsylvania Dutch to pass the time. When the rain finally slowed to a drizzle, he carried her again, this time to his buggy, which had been sheltered behind a stand of trees. The ride to Sarah's house was surreal. She sat beside this giant stranger who had saved her life, watching the familiar landscape pass by, somehow changed by what had happened. Everything looked different through the lens of her near-death experience. "Will you get in trouble?" she asked suddenly, "for being alone with me? I know the Amish have rules about that sort of thing." Jacob glanced at her, that almost smile playing at his lips again. "You are a child. There is no impropriety in saving a child." "I'm not that young," Sarah protested. "I'm 8 3/4. "Yeah, ancient indeed," Jacob said solemnly, but she could hear the humor in his voice. They were approaching her house now. Sarah could see her mother on the porch, pacing frantically. When she spotted the buggy, she ran down the driveway, not even bothering with a coat. "Sarah, oh my God, Sarah!" Her mother yanked the buggy door open before it had fully stopped, pulling Sarah into her arms. "Where have you been? Are you hurt?" "I've been worried sick." "I'm okay, Mama," Sarah said, though she winced when her weight came down on her injured ankle. "Mr. Yoder saved me. The Henderson barn collapsed, and I was trapped, but he found me and—" "Collapsed?" Her mother's face went white. She looked up at Jacob, who had climbed down from the buggy and stood with his hat in his hands, rain still dripping from his beard. "You saved my daughter." "God put me where I was needed," Jacob said simply. Sarah's mother looked like she wanted to hug him, Amish or not, but settled for clasping his large hand in both of hers. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Please come inside. Let me at least give you some coffee, something hot." "No need," Jacob said, gently extracting his hand. "I must return. The cattle are still scattered." He turned to go, then paused and looked back at Sarah. Their eyes met, and for just a moment she saw something flash in his, something deep and knowing and impossibly sad. "Be well, Sarah Mitchell," he said. Then he climbed back into his buggy and drove away, disappearing into the grey drizzle like he'd been a dream. Sarah's mother fussed over her, helping her inside, checking her ankle, running a hot bath. Through it all, Sarah kept thinking about those strange words. In time, you'll give me sons. What could he have meant? Why would he say such a thing to a little girl? That night, as she lay in bed with her ankle propped up on pillows, Sarah stared at the ceiling and replayed the day's events. The terror of being trapped, the relief of hearing footsteps, the impossible strength in Jacob's hands as he lifted the beam, the certainty in his voice when he spoke those mysterious words. Outside her window, the storm had finally passed. Stars peeked through breaking clouds. Somewhere out there, Jacob Yoder was probably home now, his cattle safely gathered. Sarah wondered if he was thinking about the English girl he'd saved. She wondered if he remembered what he'd said. She wondered if she'd ever see him again. As sleep finally took her, Sarah's last thought was of those calm, knowing eyes and the words that made no sense, but somehow felt important. In time you'll give me sons. She couldn't know then how those words would haunt her. She couldn't know that this was not an ending but a beginning. The first chapter in a story that would span decades and test the boundaries of faith, fate, and love itself. But for now she was just a little girl who'd been saved from a storm, drifting off to sleep while outside her window, the world washed clean by rain settled into an expectant quiet, as if waiting for what would come next. 10 years had passed since the storm, but Sarah Mitchell still dreamed about it sometimes. She'd wake with the phantom weight of wooden beams across her legs and the echo of those strange words in her ears. In the dream, Jacob Yoder's face was always exactly as she remembered it, calm, knowing, impossibly sad. At 18, Sarah had grown into a young woman who didn't quite fit anywhere. Too studious for the popular crowd, too pretty for the bookish one to fully accept her. She moved through her senior year at Millbrook High like a ghost with substance, present but not quite connected. "Sarah, you're daydreaming again," her friend Lisa whispered, nudging her during history class. Sarah blinked, focusing on Mr. Harrison's lecture about the Civil War. But her mind wasn't on battlefields. It was on the fact that she'd seen Jacob Yoder again yesterday, for the first time in a decade. She'd been driving past the farmer's market when she spotted him at a vegetable stand. The same broad shoulders, the same careful movements. Though his beard showed threads of premature grey now, she'd slowed the car, heart pounding, but couldn't bring herself to stop. What would she say? "Hello, remember me? You saved my life," and said something cryptic about sons. "Earth to Sarah," Lisa persisted. The bell rang. Sarah gathered her books mechanically, her mind still on that glimpse of Jacob. She'd driven past the Yoder farm a few times over the years, always slowing down, never stopping. It sat on Route 42, a pristine collection of white buildings and perfectly tended fields that looked like something from another century. "You're being weird lately," Lisa said, as they walked to lunch. "Weirder than usual, I mean." "Thanks for the clarification," Sarah said dryly. "I'm serious. You've been spacey all week. Is this about college?" Sarah had been accepted to Penn State, a full scholarship for their pre-med program. It was everything she'd worked for, everything her parents had dreamed of. So why did the thought of leaving Millbrook fill her with such inexplicable dread? "Maybe," she lied. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual chaos. Sarah picked at her lunch, half listening to Lisa's chatter about prom plans. Through the window she could see storm clouds gathering. Spring in Pennsylvania meant volatile weather, though nothing like that day 10 years ago. "Did you hear about the accident?" Tommy Chen slid into the seat across from them, his face serious. "What accident?" Lisa leaned forward, always eager for drama. "The Amish kid, one of the Yoder boys, got kicked by a horse yesterday, really bad. They say he might not make it." Sarah's fork clattered to her tray. "Which Yoder?" Tommy shrugged. "I don't know. One of the younger ones. My dad was the paramedic on call. Said it was touch and go. The rest of lunch passed in a blur. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Jacob at the farmer's market yesterday, looking healthy and whole. It couldn't be him. The Yoders had several sons. But still, after school, Sarah found herself driving toward the Yoder farm. She told herself she was just concerned, being a good neighbor. The lie felt hollow, even in her own mind. The farm was in chaos when she arrived. Buggies filled the yard. Groups of Amish men and women moved with urgent purpose. Sarah parked on the road's shoulder, suddenly aware of how out of place her beat-up Honda looked among the horses and simple vehicles. She was about to lose her nerve and leave when she saw him. Jacob stood near the barn, talking intently with an older man. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry etched on his face. Before she could think better of it, Sarah got out of the car and walked toward them. Several Amish women noticed her approach, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Sarah's jeans and Penn State sweatshirt marked her as distinctly English. Jacob looked up as she approached. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by something else: surprise, concern. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, and her name sounded strange in his mouth after all these years. "Mr. Yoder," she said, suddenly formal. "I heard about the accident. I wanted to... I hope your son is okay." The older man beside Jacob, his father, she realized, looked between them with sharp interest. "You know this English girl?" he asked in accented English. "She is the child from the storm," Jacob said simply. 10 years ago. Understanding dawned on the elder Yoder's face. He studied Sarah with new interest, and she had the uncomfortable feeling of being weighed and measured. "It is not my son," Jacob said, turning back to Sarah. "My brother, Samuel. He is 15. "Oh," Sarah said, relief flooding through her. Then guilt at feeling relieved. "Is he going to be all right?" "God willing," Jacob said. "He is at the English hospital now." An awkward silence stretched between them. Sarah became acutely aware of the other Amish watching their interaction. She should leave. She'd expressed her concern. There was no reason to stay. "I remember what you said," she blurted out instead. "That day in the storm." Jacob's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. His father's gaze sharpened. "You were young," Jacob said carefully. "Sometimes memory plays trick. In time you'll give me sons." Sarah quoted. "I didn't misunderstand. I didn't forget." The elder Yoder made a sound, surprise or disapproval. Sarah couldn't tell. He said something to Jacob in Pennsylvania Dutch, the words rapid and harsh. Jacob responded in the same language, his tone respectful but firm. "You should go," Jacob said to Sarah, but his eyes seemed to say something else entirely. "This is a difficult time for our family." Sarah nodded, cheeks burning. What had she expected? That he'd explain the mystery that had haunted her for a decade, that there would be some magical connection. She turned to leave, but Jacob's voice stopped her. "Samuel likes English books," he said quietly. "Stories of adventure. Perhaps, if you have any to spare." It was an olive branch, carefully extended. Sarah met his eyes and saw that same deep sadness she remembered from childhood. "I'll bring some tomorrow," she promised. Driving home, Sarah's hands shook on the steering wheel. She'd spoken to him. After 10 years, she'd actually spoken to Jacob Yoder, and he remembered her. More importantly, he remembered what he'd said, despite his deflection. That evening, Sarah raided her bookshelf. She selected carefully, nothing too modern or inappropriate, but engaging enough for a 15-year-old boy. The Chronicles of Narnia, some Louis L'Amour westerns, a collection of Jack London stories. Her mother found her packing them into a box. "What's all this?" "For a sick friend," Sarah said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her mother's expression grew knowing. "Sarah, honey, is this about that Yoder man? Mrs. Patterson mentioned she saw you at their farm today." Small towns, nothing stayed secret long. "I'm just being neighborly," Sarah said. "Sweetheart, Her mother sat on the bed, her face serious. I'm grateful to Jacob Yoder. He saved your life. But you need to be careful. The Amish, they're good people, but they're different. Their world and ours don't mix. I know that. Do you? Because you've been different ever since you saw him at the market last week.
Yes, I noticed. You're 18, Sarah.
You have your whole life ahead of you. College, medical school, all your dreams. I said I know, Sarah snapped, then immediately felt guilty. I'm sorry, I wanted to do something nice. For the family that saved me. Her mother's expression softened. You have a good heart. Just be careful with it, okay? Later that night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, much as she had 10 years ago. But now the questions were different. Why had seeing Jacob again affected her so strongly? Why did those words still echo in her mind? She thought about the way he'd looked at her today, recognition mixed with something that might have been resignation, like he was seeing something inevitable unfold. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Another spring storm approaching. Sarah closed her eyes and tried not to think about fate, about mysterious words spoken in storms, about sad eyes that seemed to see too much. The next morning, she drove back to the Yoder farm. The chaos of yesterday had settled into quiet worry. Fewer buggies crowded the yard. Sarah parked in the same spot and retrieved her box of books. A young Amish woman answered her knock at the door. She looked to be about Sarah's age, with Jacob's dark eyes but a softer expression. I'm Sarah Mitchell, Sarah said. I brought books for Samuel. The girl's face lit up. Jacob mentioned you might come. I'm Rebecca, his sister. Please, come in. The house was simpler than Sarah expected, but spotlessly clean. Wooden furniture, no electricity, but filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with modern conveniences. Rebecca led her to the kitchen where several women were preparing food. Sarah has brought books for Samuel, Rebecca announced. The women looked up, their expressions carefully neutral. Sarah recognized the evaluation in their eyes, the English girl who'd been speaking with Jacob yesterday. That is kind, an older woman said. Sarah recognized her as Jacob's mother by the shape of her face. Samuel will appreciate them when he returns home. How is he? Sarah asked. Better, Mrs. Yoder said. The English doctors say he will recover, though it will take time. She paused, studying Sarah with those familiar dark eyes. You are the girl from the storm. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. Jacob spoke of it. Mrs. Yoder continued. How God used him that day. We have prayed for you over the years. The simple statement hit Sarah unexpectedly. This family, this world so separate from hers, had been praying for her. A stranger saved in a storm. Thank you, she managed. Would you like some tea? Rebecca asked. And choufle pie. I made it fresh this morning. Sarah knew she should leave. Every moment she spent here made things more complicated, but she found herself nodding, accepting the chair. Rebecca pulled out for her. The kitchen filled with gentle conversation as the women worked. They included Sarah naturally, asking about her plans after graduation, her family, when they learned she was going to study medicine. There was genuine approval. Healing is a gift, Mrs. Yoder said. To use it in service of others is blessed work. Sarah was reaching for her third piece of choufle pie. It was that good when Jacob entered through the back door. He stopped short, seeing her at his kitchen table, surrounded by his family. Sarah has brought books for Samuel, Rebecca explained quickly. Jacob nodded slowly. He looked tired. Sarah noticed. Probably hadn't slept much with his brother in the hospital. That is kind, he said. His eyes met Sarah's briefly, then slid away. Samuel will be pleased. I should go, Sarah said, standing. Thank you for the tea and pie. Come back, Rebecca said impulsively. When Samuel is home, he would like to meet the English girl who thought of him. Sarah glanced at Jacob. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't object. I'd like that, Sarah said. Jacob walked her to her car, maintaining a careful distance. They stood awkwardly by her Honda, the spring sun warm on their faces. "Your Emlyn is lovely," Sarah said to break the silence. "They are good people," Jacob agreed. Then, quieter, "You should not come too often." The words stung. "I'm sorry if I've overstepped." "No." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah felt like that 8-year-old girl again, pinned by the weight of his gaze. "That is not what I mean, but you are young. You have a life waiting for you, dreams to follow." "How do you know what dreams I have?" Rebecca mentioned. "Medical school. It is a good path." "Maybe I don't want that path," Sarah said, surprising herself with the words. Jacob's expression grew pained. "You do not know what you are saying. Then explain it to me. Explain what you meant that day. Explain why those words have haunted me for 10 years. Explain why—" She cut herself off before she could say something even more foolish. "Some things are better left unexplained," Jacob said softly. "Some words are better forgotten." "But I can't forget," Sarah whispered. They stood there, 2 feet and 1,000 worlds apart. A horse whinnied in the nearby pasture. Life moved around them, but for a moment they were still. "Go to college, Sarah Mitchell," Jacob finally said. "Become a doctor. Save lives. Find happiness in your world." He turned and walked back to the house before she could respond. Sarah sat in her car for a long time, watching the farm, feeling like she was standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. That night, the spring storm finally broke. Sarah lay listening to rain lash her window and thought about paths chosen and unchosen, about words spoken in storms and futures that felt less like choices and more like gravity. She thought about Jacob's sad eyes and wondered if he'd seen this coming all those years ago, wondered if that's why he'd looked so resigned. "In time you'll give me son." The words circled her mind as thunder shook the house. Sarah pressed her pillow over her head, but she couldn't block them out, couldn't block out the growing certainty that her neatly planned future was about to derail in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But that's the thing about fate. It doesn't ask permission. It just unfolds, one choice at a time, until you look back and realize you've been walking its path all along. Sarah made it through graduation, but just barely. Her valedictorian speech felt hollow. Words about bright futures and endless possibilities that tasted like ash in her mouth. She smiled for photos, accepted congratulations, and counted the days until she'd leave for Penn State. Except she kept finding reasons to visit the Yoder farm. Samuel had come home after 2 weeks in the hospital, pale and thin, but eager for the books she'd brought. Sarah would sit on the porch with him, reading aloud when his headaches were bad, listening to his questions about the English world when he felt better. "Why do you come here?" Samuel asked one afternoon in early July. He was propped up on a daybed the family had moved onto the porch, his legs still in a cast. Sarah looked up from the call of the wild. "To see you, to help. Jacob says you're going to be a doctor. That's the plan." Samuel studied her with eyes that were disconcertingly similar to his older brother's. "But you don't want to go. What makes you say that? The way you look when anyone mentions it. Like our cow, Gertie, when we try to lead her to a new pasture. She goes, but her heart's not in it." Sarah laughed, despite herself. "Comparing me to a cow. Flattering." "Gertie's a good cow," Samuel said seriously. Then more quietly, "Jacob's been different since you started coming." Sarah's hands tightened on the book. "Different how?" "Quieter. And he works even harder than before, if that's possible. Yesterday, he split enough wood for 3 winters. Det says he's trying to exhaust himself." Before Sarah could respond, Rebecca appeared with lemonade. "Samuel, you're gossiping like an old woman at market." "I'm observing," Samuel protested. "There's a difference." Rebecca shook her head, but smiled. She'd become a friend over these weeks, the closest Sarah had to understanding this world that increasingly fascinated her. "Will you stay for supper?" Rebecca asked. "Mama's making chicken and dumplings." Sarah should say no. She'd stayed for too many suppers already, become too comfortable at the long wooden table with its simple food and complex dynamics. But the thought of another evening at home, Her parents' worried glances and careful questions made her nod. "I'll help with preparations," she offered. In the kitchen, Sarah fell into the rhythm she'd learned over the past weeks. The Yoder women had accepted her presence with a grace that both welcomed and maintained boundaries. They taught her to cook without electricity, to find satisfaction in the manual rhythm of kneading bread and churning butter. "You're getting good at that," Rebecca noted, as Sarah crimped the edges of a pie crust. "Almost like you've been doing it all your life." "I have a good teacher," Sarah said. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sarah, can I ask you something? As a friend?" "Of course." "What are you looking for here?" Sarah's hands stilled. "What do you mean? You're smart, beautiful. You have opportunities our women could never dream of. Yet you spend your summer on our porch, in our kitchen. Why?" The honest answer terrified Sarah, so she gave a partial truth. "It's peaceful here. Real in a way my world isn't." "And Jacob?" Rebecca's voice was gentle but direct. "Is he part of what you're looking for?" Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. It's not like that, isn't it?" Rebecca touched her arm. "Sarah, I care for you. You've become dear to our family. But you must understand, Jacob made his choice long ago. He joined the church at 16, younger than most. His commitment to our way is absolute. I know that. Do you? Because sometimes the way you look at him," Rebecca sighed, "and the way he doesn't look at you, with such determination not to, it worries me." The kitchen door opened before Sarah could respond. Jacob entered, sawdust in his hair and exhaustion lining his face. He stopped short, seeing them. "Am I interrupting?" "Just girl talk," Rebecca said lightly. "Supper's almost ready." Jacob nodded and moved to the sink to wash. Sarah tried not to watch the way his shoulders moved, tried not to notice how his presence changed the air in the room. She failed at both. Supper was its usual cheerful chaos. The Yoder family had a warmth that made Sarah ache for something she couldn't name. She sat in what had become her usual spot, between Rebecca and Samuel, carefully across from Jacob rather than beside him. The conversation flowed around crops and weather, Samuel's improving health, plans for the upcoming harvest, normal things, safe things. But underneath, Sarah felt a tension building like storm pressure. It broke after supper when Jacob's father made an announcement. "The Millers have asked if Jacob would consider their daughter, Mary," he said, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "She's a good girl, strong faith, skilled in household arts. She would make a fine wife." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Rebecca's hand found hers under the table and squeezed. "I will consider it," Jacob said finally, his voice steady. "Good," his father said. "You're 32, son. Past time you started your own family." Sarah excused herself as soon as she could, claiming she needed to get home before dark. No one tried to stop her, though Samuel's knowing look followed her to the door. She made it to her car before the tears came. Stupid. She was being stupid. What had she expected? That Jacob would wait forever for a girl who wasn't even part of his world? That those mysterious words from a decade ago meant anything beyond a moment's strangeness in a storm? The driver's door opened. Jacob stood there, hat in hand, looking as conflicted as she'd ever seen him. "You're upset," he said. "I'm fine." The lie came out sharp. "Congratulations on Mary Miller. I'm sure she's lovely." "Sarah, don't." She turned to face him fully, anger overriding sense. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend you care how I feel about this." "I care more than I should," he said quietly. "That is the problem." The admission hung between them. Sarah's anger deflated, leaving only hurt and confusion. "Then why?" she whispered. "Why push me away? Why Mary Miller?" "Because you deserve more than what I could give you," Jacob said. "You deserve your dreams, your education, your life in the English world, not a man who would ask you to give up everything you are." "What if I want to give it up?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Jacob's face went pale. "You don't know what you're saying." "Stop telling me what I know." Sarah got out of the car, standing to face him. "I've spent 10 years trying to understand what happened that day in the storm. 10 years with your words echoing in my head. And now, when I finally start to understand what I feel. You're going to marry Mary Miller. I haven't agreed to anything, Jacob said. But you will, because it's the right thing to do, because it's what's expected. Sarah laughed bitterly. And I'll go to Penn State, because it's what's expected of me. We'll both live the lives others have planned for us, and pretend we're happy. It's not that simple, isn't it? Sarah stepped closer, close enough to see the pain in his eyes. Tell me you feel nothing. Tell me I'm imagining this. Tell me those words you spoke meant nothing, and I'll leave right now and never come back. Jacob was silent for so long, Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I was 22 when I found you in that barn, he said. Young, prideful, certain of my path. Then I saw you there, small and frightened but so fierce, fighting to free yourself even as the building fell around you. And I knew what? That God was showing me something, a test, perhaps, or a punishment for my pride. He met her eyes. I looked at you, 8 years old, and English, and saw my future, saw sons with your eyes, and my stubbornness. The words came without thought, without permission. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. And now you're here, against all sense, against all wisdom, you're here, and I'm a man who must choose between his faith and... He stopped himself. And what? And something that cannot be, he finished. You should go, Sarah. Go to college. Become the doctor you're meant to be. Find an Englishman who can give you the life you deserve. I don't want an Englishman, Sarah said softly. I want the one who lifted a barn beam like it weighed nothing, who carried me through a storm, who saw something in me before I even knew myself. Jacob closed his eyes as if in pain. You're asking me to destroy you, to take your dreams, your family's hopes, everything you could be, and reduce it to what our life allows. I won't do that. That's my choice to make. Is it? When you don't truly understand what you're choosing. His voice rose slightly, the most emotion she'd ever heard from him. You see our life from the outside, the peace, the simplicity, the faith. You don't see the restrictions, the submission required of our women, the total separation from the world you know. Then show me, Sarah challenged. Give me time to understand. Don't marry Mary Miller, because it's expected. Give me until harvest. If I still feel the same, if I'm willing to do what's necessary, you're asking for the impossible. I'm asking for the chance to choose my own life. The real choice, not the one everyone expects me to make. Jacob looked at her for a long moment. In the fading light, she could see the battle in his expression, duty against desire, faith against feeling. Harvest, he said finally. I'll wait until harvest. But Sarah, when you realize what you're giving up, when you return to your world where you belong, remember that I tried to spare you this. He turned and walked back to the house before she could respond. Sarah sat in her car until full dark, shaking with the magnitude of what had just happened. She'd challenged fate itself, demanded the right to choose a path everyone said was wrong. The drive home felt both too short and endless. Her parents were waiting in the living room, their faces carefully neutral. We need to talk, her mother said. Sarah sat, knowing what was coming. In a small town, nothing stayed secret. Mrs. Patterson saw you at the Yoder farm again, her father said. Sarah, what's going on? You've been there almost every day for weeks. They're friends, Sarah said. Samuel needs Sarah. Her mother's voice was gentle but firm. We're not blind. We see how you've changed this summer, how you've pulled away from your friends, from your plans. Is this about Jacob Yoder? The direct question demanded a direct answer. Yes. Her father's face flushed. Sarah, you're throwing away your future for some fantasy. It's not a fantasy. Then what is it? Her mother leaned forward. Help us understand. You're brilliant, talented, with every opportunity ahead of you. Why would you even consider? Sarah thought about how to explain something she barely understood herself. Do you remember after the storm, how I used to have nightmares? Her parents nodded. They weren't nightmares. Not really. I was looking for something I'd lost in that barn. Except, I hadn't lost it yet. I hadn't even found it. She met their eyes. I think I was looking for who I'm supposed to be. You're supposed to be a doctor, her father said firmly. You've worked for this your entire life. No, Sarah said quietly. I've worked for what you wanted, what everyone expected. But what if that's not my path? Her mother was crying now, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Sarah, please, think about what you're saying. The Amish, you'd have to give up everything. Your education, your independence, electricity, cars, the ability to make your own choices. I'm making my own choice now, Sarah said. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing. I'm not saying I'll join them. I'm just asking for time to understand what I feel. And if you decide to, her father couldn't even finish the sentence. Then I'll do what's necessary, Sarah said, and I'll hope you can forgive me. She went to her room before they could respond, knowing there were no words that would make this easier. Outside, another summer storm was building. Sarah lay on her bed and thought about choices and consequences, about paths that diverged in storms, and hearts that recognized home in the most unexpected places. Until harvest. She had until harvest to understand if what she felt was real or just the pull of something different. Until harvest to decide if she could truly give up her English life for a world that seemed to call to something deep in her soul. The thunder rolled closer, and Sarah closed her eyes. In her mind she saw Jacob's face when she'd asked for time, hope and fear warring in those dark eyes. She'd given him a choice too, she realized. A chance to step away from expectations and duty and reach for something else. Whether either of them would be brave enough to take it remained to be seen. But for now, in the space between lightning and thunder, between decided futures and uncertain presents, there was possibility, and that, Sarah thought as rain began to fall, was enough to begin. The first thing Sarah learned was that wanting something and living it were vastly different things. Rebecca became her guide into the Amish world, though always with careful boundaries. Sarah would arrive at dawn, dressing modestly in long skirts and simple blouses. Her mother had helped her sew with tears in her eyes. She learned to milk cows, can vegetables, and cook on a wood stove. Her soft hands blistered, then cooliesed. Her back ached from bending over garden rows. "You're trying too hard," Rebecca observed one morning as Sarah struggled with the butter churn. "Let the rhythm find you, don't force it." Sarah eased her grip, let her body find the natural motion. The butter began to form properly. "Better," Rebecca said. "Our life is about patience, submission to God's timing. The English always want to rush, to force. We wait, we accept." "Is that what Jacob's doing with Mary Miller?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself. "Accepting." Rebecca's face grew careful. "He hasn't given an answer yet. That itself speaks volumes. Jacob has never been one to delay decisions." They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic thump of the church through the window. Sarah could see Jacob in the far field, cutting hay with his brothers. Even from this distance, she could recognize his particular way of moving. Economical, purposeful, graceful, despite his size. "He watches you," Rebecca said quietly. "When he thinks no one notices, the way you watched him just now." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. "Rebecca, I'm not judging, just observing." Rebecca touched her arm. "But Sarah, watching isn't enough. If you truly mean to choose this life, you must understand what it requires. Not just the work, but the submission, the obedience." "I'm trying to understand, then come to service this Sunday." Sarah's heart skipped. She'd been learning the practical aspects of Amish life, but church was different, sacred. A line that once crossed would change everything. "Would I be welcome?" "Seekers are always welcome." But Sarah, Rebecca's expression grew serious. "Coming to church will make a statement. People will talk. It will reach Mary Miller and her family. Are you prepared for that?" Was she? Sarah thought about the past weeks, the slow revelation of this life's demands, rising at 4 to help with milking, working until dark, the absence of music, television, the constant physical labor. but also the peace, the sense of purpose, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. "Yes," she said. That Sunday, Sarah stood before her closet, staring at the single plain dress Rebecca had helped her make. Navy blue, no buttons or zippers, just pins and hooks. Wearing it to church would be a declaration. Her parents were at the kitchen table when she came down. They took in her appearance, the dress, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, the absence of makeup, and her mother made a small, wounded sound. "I have to know," Sarah said softly. "I have to truly understand before I decide anything." "You're breaking our hearts," her father said, his voice thick. "I know, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Sarah. Sorry doesn't give us back our daughter. I'm still your daughter, no matter what I choose." Her mother stood abruptly and left the room. Her father followed without another word. Sarah stood alone in the kitchen, where she'd eaten thousands of meals, helped with homework, celebrated birthdays. It already felt like a memory. The Yoder farm was bustling when she arrived. Families gathered for the every other Sunday service, rotating between homes. Sarah parked on the road and walked up the drive, intensely aware of the stares and whispers her presence caused. Rebecca met her at the door. "You came. I said I would." Saying and doing are different things. "Come, you'll sit with the unmarried women." The service was held in the cleared main floor of the house, benches arranged in precise rows, men on one side, women on the other. Sarah followed Rebecca to their section, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes. She spotted Mary Miller across the room, pretty in an understated way, with gentle eyes that widened when she saw Sarah. Then Jacob entered with the other men, and Sarah forgot about Mary Miller. He wore his Sunday best, black and severe, but his eyes found her immediately. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, warning, promise, before he took his seat. The service lasted 3 hours. Prayers and hymns in High German that Sarah couldn't understand but felt in her bones. The rhythm of voices rising and falling, the creak of benches, the sense of community worship, unlike anything she'd experienced in her Methodist church. When the minister spoke about the dangers of being unequally yoked, about the importance of keeping their community pure, Sarah felt the words like physical blows. Several people glanced her way. She kept her eyes forward, her back straight, refusing to show how much it hurt. After the service, the meal, Sarah helped serve, keeping her eyes down, trying to be useful without overstepping. She carried platters of food, refilled water glasses, cleared tables. The work was familiar now, comforting in its simplicity. "You did well," an older woman said as Sarah passed. Sarah looked up, surprised to find Jacob's mother studying her. Not many English could sit still so long. "Thank you, Mrs. Yoder. It's not a compliment, child, just an observation." But her eyes were kind. "Rebecca says you've been learning our ways." "I'm trying. Trying is not being, but..." She glanced across the room where Jacob stood with the men, carefully not looking in their direction. Sometimes God works in ways we don't expect. Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Yoder moved away. Sarah continued serving, but her mind churned with questions. Was that approval, a warning? Both. After the meal, families began to leave. Sarah helped with cleanup, working alongside the women as naturally as if she'd been doing it all her life. But she could feel the tension building. Jacob had managed to avoid her all day, but that couldn't last. She was carrying dishes to the kitchen when Mary Miller approached. "You're Sarah," Mary said. Not a question. "Yes." Mary studied her with those gentle eyes. Up close, Sarah could see why everyone considered her such a good match for Jacob. Pretty, serene, obviously kind, everything an Amish wife should be. "I need to ask you something," Mary said quietly. "Do you love him?" The directness of it took Sarah's breath away. It's a simple question. Do you love Jacob Yoder?" Sarah thought about lying. It would be easier, kinder, but something in Mary's steady gaze demanded truth. "Yes." Mary nodded as if she'd expected the answer. And he loves you. He hasn't said so, would never dishonor me that way. But I see it when he doesn't think anyone's watching. The way he looks when someone mentions your name. Mary, I won't marry a man who loves another, Mary said simply. It would be a sin against all of us. She touched Sarah's hand gently. But be sure, Sarah Mitchell, be very sure. Because if you're not strong enough for this life, you'll destroy him. She walked away before Sarah could respond, leaving her standing in the kitchen with a burden heavier than any physical labor. The sun was setting by the time Sarah finished helping. Most families had left. She walked to her car slowly, exhausted in body and spirit. She'd learned so much today, but it only made her realize how much more there was to understand. Sarah. She turned to find Jacob standing by her car. They hadn't spoken all day, hadn't been alone together since that night weeks ago when she'd asked for time. You came to church, he said. Rebecca invited me. That's not why you came. No, Sarah admitted. I came because I needed to understand, to really see what choosing this would mean. And Sarah thought about the long service, the physical discomfort, the pointed sermon, the separation of men and women, the weight of tradition and expectation. Then she thought about the hymns that seemed to reach heaven, the community working in perfect harmony, the peace that ran deeper than anything in her English life. And I have more questions than ever, she said honestly. Good. Questions mean you're thinking, not just feeling. Jacob stepped closer, still maintaining proper distance, but near enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Mary Miller spoke with me after service. Sarah's heart sank. Jacob, I'm sorry. I never meant. She's withdrawing her family's offer. Jacob continued. She says she won't marry where there's no possibility of true affection. I didn't ask her to do that. No. Mary is wise beyond her years. She sees what is, not what she wishes. He met Sarah's eyes. As must we. What are you saying? I'm saying that harvest is still 2 months away. You've seen our worship, learned our work, but there's more. The youth gatherings, the frolics, the daily reality of a life without the conveniences you take for granted. See it all before you decide. And if I still choose this, still choose you. Jacob's expression was unreadable in the fading light. Then we'll face what comes, together or part, as God wills. He turned to go, then paused. There's a barn raising next Saturday at the Byler farm. The young people will gather after. Rebecca will bring you if you wish. It was an invitation to go deeper, to see more, to move from observer to participant. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. As she drove home, Sarah's mind reeled with the day's revelations. Mary's withdrawal, Mrs. Yoder's cryptic kindness, the weight of those 3 hours of worship, Jacob's invitation to see more. Her house was dark when she arrived. Her parents had left a note at Aunt Karen's, leftovers in fridge. They couldn't even be in the same house with her anymore. Sarah heated the food, but couldn't eat. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, where she'd done homework for 12 years, and tried to reconcile who she'd been with who she was becoming. Her acceptance letter to Penn State was still pinned to the refrigerator. 2 months ago, it had represented everything she'd worked for. Now it looked like a relic from another life. The phone rang. Lisa's name showed on the caller ID. Sarah let it go to voicemail. Her friends had given up trying to understand what was happening to her. It's like you're in a cult, Lisa had said last week. This isn't you, Sarah. But that was the thing. It felt more like her than anything else ever had. Later, lying in bed, Sarah thought about Mary Miller's question. Do you love him? Such a simple question with such a complicated answer. Yes, she loved Jacob Yoder. But was love enough to bridge 2 worlds? Was it enough to give up everything she'd known? Outside, a summer storm rolled through. Sarah listened to the rain and thought about that first storm, the one that started everything. She'd been trapped then, pinned by fallen beams with no way to free herself. Was she trapped now too? Or was this what freedom really looked like? The chance to choose a life that called to your soul, even if everyone else called it captivity. 2 months until harvest. 2 months to know for sure. Sarah closed her eyes and dreamed of hymns in High German and strong hands, lifting impossible weights. She dreamed of submission and freedom being the same thing. She dreamed of sons with dark eyes, and her stubborn chin. When she woke, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and ready for whatever came next. The barn raising was like nothing Sarah had ever experienced. She arrived with Rebecca at dawn to find dozens of families already gathered, men sorting lumber while women organized food stations. The skeletal frame of the barn stood against the sky like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. "Stay close," Rebecca whispered. "Watch everything. This is who we are at our best." Sarah helped where she could, carrying water to the men, slicing vegetables with the women. She watched in awe as the community moved like a single organism, each person knowing their role without being told. By noon, walls were rising. By afternoon, the roof beams were in place. Jacob worked alongside his brothers, his strength evident but never showing. Once, when lifting a particularly heavy beam, his eyes found Sarah's across the yard. The moment stretched between them, taut as a wire, before he turned back to his work. "He's showing off," Samuel said beside her. He'd graduated to crutches and insisted on coming to watch. "He's working," Sarah corrected. "He's working harder than necessary. That beam could have waited for more men. But you were watching, so..." Samuel grinned. "You're terrible. I'm observant. There's a difference." As evening approached, the barn stood complete, a testament to community effort. The older folks began to leave, but the young people gathered in the new structure for the traditional celebration. Someone had brought a harmonica, the one instrument allowed at such gatherings. Couples began to pair off for the simple dances. Sarah hung back, uncertain of her welcome. Several young men approached Rebecca, clearly seeking her as a partner. She declined politely, staying with Sarah. "You don't have to babysit me," Sarah said. "I'm not. I'm waiting." "For what?" Rebecca smiled. "You'll see." Then Jacob was there, appearing from the crowd of young people. He stood before them, full and serious. "Rebecca, would you partner with Matthew Byler? He's too shy to ask." Rebecca's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Of course." She squeezed Sarah's hand and disappeared into the crowd. Jacob turned to Sarah. "May I?" It wasn't proper. She was English, an outsider. Dancing with her would be a public declaration of intent. Sarah could feel the weight of watching eyes, the whispers that would follow. "Yes," she said. The dance was simple, more like structured walking than the dancing she knew. But Jacob's hand in hers was warm and steady. They moved together through the patterns, and Sarah felt something click into place, this sense of belonging she'd been chasing all summer. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them. Your father looks ready to intervene." "He won't. Not publicly." They turned with the music, and Sarah caught sight of their reflection in a window. The plain dress, the simple hairstyle, Jacob's protective presence beside her. She looked Amish. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. After the dance, young people gathered in groups, talking and laughing. Sarah found herself welcomed more easily than expected. Martha Byler asked about her garden. Jonas King wanted to know about English farming methods. Slowly, carefully, they were making space for her. "You dance well for an English," a voice said. Sarah turned to find Annie Lapp, known for her sharp tongue and sharper judgment. "Thank you," Sarah said carefully. "Don't thank me yet. Dancing at a frolic is one thing. Living our life is another." Annie's eyes were cold. "My cousin joined the English 2 years ago. Thought their world was better. Now she works in a factory, lives alone in a tiny apartment, hasn't seen her family in months." "Is that what you'd condemn Jacob to? If he left for you, I would never ask him to leave," Sarah said firmly. "No? Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking for the chance to choose this life. To join it, not take him from it." Annie laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think it's that simple. Put on plain clothes, learn to milk cows, and suddenly you're one of Annie. Jacob appeared at Sarah's elbow, his voice carrying quiet authority. That's enough. Is it? Annie faced him squarely. She's English, Jacob. No amount of playing dress-up will change that. When winter comes and the work is hard and there's no electricity to warm her, no car to escape in, what then? When babies come and there's no epidural, no modern conveniences, will she still think our life is quaint? That's not your concern, Jacob said. It is when you're making a fool of yourself over her, when the whole community watches you moon after an English girl, like a lovesick boy. You're better than this, Jacob Yoder. Your parents deserve better. God deserves better. She stormed off, leaving silence in her wake. The other young people suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Sarah stood frozen, Annie's words hitting like physical blows because underneath the cruelty was truth. What did she really know about the hardships of this life? Come, Jacob said quietly. Let's walk. They left the barn, moving into the soft evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Jacob led her to a bench under an apple tree, far enough from the gathering for privacy, but still within sight of propriety. I'm sorry, Sarah said. I didn't mean to cause problems. Annie speaks from pain. The cousin she mentioned, they were best friends. The loss cut deep. Jacob stared at his hands. But she's not wrong about the challenges. I know, do you? He turned to her then, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen. Sarah, what I feel for you, it goes against everything I was taught, everything I'm supposed to want. If you choose this life, it cannot be for me. It must be for God, for the life itself. Otherwise, when hardships come, and they will, resentment will follow. You think I don't understand that? I think you're brave and determined and used to achieving what you set your mind to. But this isn't like getting into medical school. This is about changing who you are at the most fundamental level. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, Tell me about when you joined the church. Jacob seemed surprised by the change of subject, but answered, I was 16, young, even for us. Most wait until 18 or older. Why so young? Because I was afraid, he admitted. I'd started having dreams about the English world, about a life beyond our fences. It scared me, the strength of that wanting. So I chose before I could be tempted further. Do you regret it? No. The church gave me purpose, structure, peace. But, he paused, choosing words carefully, sometimes I wonder about the boy who dreamed of more, what he might have done, who he might have become. And then you met me, Sarah said softly. And then I met you. Jacob's voice was rough. This English child who looked at me like I was a hero when I was just a man doing what needed doing. And something in me recognized something in you. Even then, recognized and spoke words I didn't understand. In time you'll give me sons, Sarah quoted. I've regretted those words every day since. Why? Because they bound us somehow, put a chain between your life and mine that neither of us could break. You should have forgotten them, forgotten me. Gone on to live your English life without this shadow over it. But I didn't forget. No, Jacob said sadly. You didn't forget. They sat in silence as darkness gathered. In the barn, someone lit lanterns. The sound of young voices and laughter drifted on the evening breeze. A world Sarah was on the edge of, neither in nor out. There's something else, Jacob said finally. Something you need to understand. If you join us, if we marry, there are expectations. Many children, as God wills. No birth control. No modern medical interventions unless life is at risk. You would go from preparing to be a doctor to being denied basic choices about your own body. Can you accept that? Sarah thought about the future she'd planned. Medical school, residency, a career saving lives. Then she thought about the life growing inside this community. The peace, the purpose, the man beside her who was trying so hard to discourage her for her own good. I delivered a calf last week, she said. Bessie was having trouble, and the vet was hours away. Rebecca talked me through it. When that calf finally came, wet and struggling, and took its first breath, she met Jacob's eyes. I saved a life, not in an operating room, not with modern tools, but with my hands and God's grace. It was enough. More than enough. Sarah, I know what I'm choosing, Jacob. I know what I'm giving up, but I also know what I'm gaining. A life of purpose, community, faith. And yes, because despite your best efforts to discourage me, despite everyone's warnings, my heart knows what it wants. Hearts can be wrong, so can heads. I've lived my whole life by what my head said was right. Good grades, good college, good career, and it felt empty, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. She gestured to her plain dress. This fits, Jacob. This life fits in a way nothing else ever has. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. 2 weeks from now is the instructional class. For those considering baptism, if you're serious, truly serious, you could attend. It would be the beginning of formal preparation. Sarah's heart leaped. You mean I mean nothing yet? Attending classes isn't joining, it's learning what joining truly means. The Ordnung, our rules, the commitment required. Many attend and decide against baptism. But it's a start. It's a start, Jacob agreed. He stood, offering her his hand. Come, I should return you to Rebecca before more tongues wag. They walked back slowly, hands properly apart but hearts closer than ever. The gathering was winding down, families preparing to leave. Rebecca waited by the buggy, her expression knowing. Good talk, she asked innocently. Educational, Sarah replied. The best talks usually are. The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought. When they reached Sarah's car, Rebecca surprised her with a hug. You're stronger than Annie thinks, Rebecca whispered. Stronger than any of us knew. Maybe strong enough. Maybe certainty is for God. We mortals must make do with maybe. Driving home, Sarah felt the weight of the evening, Annie's harsh truths, Jacob's careful warnings, the possibility of those instructional classes. Her phone, silent all day, showed 12 missed calls from her mother. The English world, demanding her attention. She didn't listen to the messages, not yet. At home, her parents waited in the living room. Her mother's eyes were red from crying. Her father looked older than his years. We've been talking, her father began, about this situation. Sarah sat, bracing herself. We've failed you somehow, her mother said. Failed to give you whatever it is you're looking for with them. You didn't fail. Please, let me finish. Her mother's voice shook. We've watched you slip away from us all summer. Watched you choose a life we can't understand. And we've realized something. We can either lose you to this with anger and bitterness, or we can try to understand why our brilliant daughter would choose such a path. Sarah blinked back tears. What are you saying? We're saying, her father said heavily, that if you're determined to explore this, we won't stand in your way. We don't understand it, we hate it. But we love you more than we hate your choices. Sarah crossed to them, falling into their arms like she had as a child. They held each other, crying for what was lost and what might be. There are classes, Sarah whispered, to learn about their faith. I want to attend. Her mother's arms tightened. Then attend. But promise us. Promise you'll be sure. Don't do this for a man, Sarah. Do it only if it's truly who you are. I promise. They talked late into the night, not arguing now, but sharing. Sarah tried to explain the pull she felt, the sense of rightness. Her parents tried to understand. It wasn't perfect, might never be, but it was a beginning. Later, in her room, Sarah opened her closet. Her Penn State acceptance letter sat on the desk, edges curling. In 2 weeks, she should be preparing for orientation. Instead, she'd be sitting in an Amish farmhouse, Learning the ordnung, the English girl she'd been was fading. The Amish woman she might become was still forming. In between, in this space of possibility and uncertainty, Sarah existed as both, and neither. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like promises. Somewhere, Jacob was probably looking at the same stars, wrestling with the same questions. 2 weeks until classes began. 2 weeks to be absolutely certain this was her path. Sarah touched the plain dress hanging in her closet, then the Penn State shirt beside it. 2 worlds, 2 futures, one choice that would define everything that came after. But tonight, in the quiet of her childhood room, with her parents' reluctant blessing and Jacob's careful hope, both futures felt possible. And that, Sarah thought as sleep finally claimed her, was its own kind of miracle. The instructional classes were held in the Yoder barn, the same place where Sarah had first learned to milk cows. 20 people sat on hard wooden benches, mostly young Amish preparing for baptism, and Sarah the only English person who'd ever been allowed to attend. Bishop Stoltzfus, ancient and austere, led the classes. His eyes lingered on Sarah whenever he spoke of the dangers of being unequally yoked, of the importance of complete separation from the world. To join us is to die to self, he intoned in his heavily accented English, a concession to her presence. Your will becomes God's will. Your wants become the community's needs. Can you surrender so completely? Sarah wrote notes in a small book, her hand cramping from the effort. 3 weeks of classes, and each one revealed new depths of commitment required. No photographs, graven images, no insurance God provides or he doesn't, no higher education. Pride goeth before a fall. Each rule another door closing on her former life. The English girl takes many notes, Annie Lapp observed during break. She'd joined the classes too, preparing for her own baptism, planning to write a book about us, planning to remember, Sarah replied evenly. This is too important to forget. Annie studied her with those sharp eyes. You've lasted longer than I expected. I'm stubborn. Stubbornness isn't faith. No, Sarah agreed. But sometimes it holds the door open until faith can enter. Something shifted in Annie's expression. Not quite approval, but perhaps a lessening of hostility. My cousin called last week, the one who left. She's pregnant, alone in the city working 2 jobs, no family to help when the baby comes. Is that freedom? For her, maybe it is. And for you, what is freedom for you, Sarah Mitchell? Sarah thought about it. Freedom is choosing the life that makes your soul sing, even if others call it captivity. Annie was quiet for a moment. Then, Jacob is a good man, better than most. If you hurt him, I won't. You can't know that. None of us can know what we'll do until the moment of testing comes. The classes resumed. Bishop Stoltzfus spoke of submission, of women's roles, of the joy found in service. Sarah wrote and listened, and felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on her shoulders. After class, Jacob waited by her car. They'd barely spoken during these weeks. Propriety demanded distance during her time of learning. But she'd felt his presence, steady and sure, a reminder of why she was doing this. How are you finding the teachings? He asked formally. Challenging, beautiful, terrifying. A smile ghosted across his lips. That's how faith should feel. Easy belief isn't belief at all. Bishop Stoltzfus doesn't think I'll last. Bishop Stoltzfus has seen many English come and go. He's cautious, not cruel. And you, Sarah met his eyes. What do you think? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. I think you're the strongest person I know. I think you could do anything you set your mind to. And I pray that includes this. Jacob, there's something else, he interrupted. Tomorrow there's a medical emergency training. Sister Mary Lapp, Annie's aunt, is teaching midwifery basics. You should attend. Sarah's heart jumped. But that's only for women preparing to be Amish wives, yes. I've spoken with the elders. Given your medical knowledge, They've agreed you could be helpful." He paused. "It would also be a test to see how you handle our approach to medicine." Sarah understood. This was a chance to prove herself, to show she could adapt her knowledge to their ways. "I'll be there." The next morning, Sarah arrived to find 12 Amish women gathered in Mary Lapp's kitchen. Some she knew, others were from neighboring districts. They eyed her with curiosity and some suspicion. Mary Lapp was a formidable woman in her 60s, with hands that had delivered hundreds of babies. She studied Sarah like a specimen. "So, the English girl who thinks she can become You have medical training." "Some. I've been accepted to pre-med." Sarah caught herself. "I've studied anatomy, physiology, basic emergency medicine, book learning." Mary's tone was dismissive. "Can you catch a baby in a barn with no light but lanterns? Can you turn a breach with just your hands and prayer? Can you accept when God says no?" "I can learn. We'll see." The training was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. No textbooks, no sterile procedure. Instead, Mary taught through stories, through demonstration on a worn cloth doll, through wisdom passed down through generations. "The English rush to hospitals for everything," Mary said. "We trust God and our bodies, but sometimes," her face grew shadow, "sometimes we must know when to seek help. Pride in our ways cannot come before a mother or child's life." Sarah found herself contributing carefully, suggesting signs of pre-eclampsia to watch for, demonstrating how to check for cord prolapse, sharing knowledge in a way that honored their traditions, while potentially saving lives. "You know much for one so young," Mary observed during a break. "I've been blessed with good teachers and cursed with ambition. I see it in your eyes, the hunger to do more, fix more, be more." Mary's expression softened slightly. "That hunger must die if you're to be one of us. Can you let it go?" Sarah thought of the dreams she'd harbored, surgeon, researcher, healer on a grand scale. Then she thought of the calf she'd delivered, the quiet satisfaction of that small life preserved. "I'm learning to hunger for different things," she said honestly. Mary studied her. "You might do, Sarah Mitchell. You just might do." The words, grudging as they were, felt like a victory. That evening, Sarah's parents were waiting when she got home. On the kitchen table sat a thick envelope, Penn State's final registration packet. "It came today," her mother said quietly. "The deadline to defer is tomorrow." Sarah stared at the envelope, her future in the English world, packaged and ready. All she had to do was sign, send it back and keep her options open. "You could defer," her father said. "Take a gap year. If this Amish thing doesn't work out." "That's not faith," Sarah interrupted gently. "That's hedging my bets. If I'm going to do this, I have to do it completely." Her mother's face crumpled. "Sarah, please, just keep the door open. 1 year. What could it hurt?" Everything, Sarah thought. It would hurt everything, because she'd always know there was an escape route. She'd never fully commit if she knew Penn State was waiting. She picked up the envelope, felt its weight. 4 years of high school honors, SET prep, volunteer work, all leading to this moment. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, "about why this feels right." Her parents sat, faces drawn but willing to listen. "All my life I've felt like I was performing, getting good grades because I was supposed to, planning for medical school because everyone said I should, being who you wanted me to be, who teachers expected me to be, who I thought I had to be." She met their eyes. "I was suffocating, and I didn't even know it until that barn collapsed around me." "Sarah," her mother started, "when Jacob pulled me from that barn, when he spoke those strange words, something broke loose in me. Not the beams, those chains I'd wrapped around myself trying to be perfect, trying to be what everyone else needed." Tears ran down her face. "With the Amish, I'm not special. I'm not the smart girl, the one with potential, the future doctor. I'm just Sarah, and that's enough. For the first time in my life, I'm enough." Her father reached for her hand. You were always enough for us. I know, but I didn't know it for myself. She squeezed his fingers. I need to do this. Not for Jacob, though I love him. Not for escape, though I need that too. I need to do this, because when I put on those plain clothes, when I work in their kitchens and fields, when I sit in their services and don't understand the words but feel the faith, I'm home. I'm finally truly home. Her mother was crying openly now. We'll lose you. No, Sarah said firmly. You'll have to share me, but you'll never lose me. I promise. They held each other, the three of them, as night fell around the house where Sarah had grown up. When they finally separated, Sarah took the Penn State envelope and without hesitation dropped it in the trash. It's done, she said, feeling the weight of the words. No turning back now. 3 days later was the final instructional class. Bishop Stoltzfus announced that baptism would be in 2 weeks. Asked who among them felt ready to commit. One by one, the young Amish stated their intentions. When he reached Sarah, the barn fell silent. Sarah Mitchell, the bishop said, his ancient voice carrying the weight of tradition. You have attended faithfully. You have learned our ways, but baptism is not for the curious. It is a covenant, unbreakable before God and community. Are you prepared for such commitment? Sarah stood, feeling every eye upon her. In the corner, Jacob watched, his face carefully neutral, but his hands clenched at his sides. I am, she said clearly. I ask for the community's acceptance and God's grace as I prepare for baptism. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Never had an English person come so far. Bishop Stoltzfus studied her for what felt like eternity. You understand what you're choosing? The English world, with all its privileges and possibilities, will be closed to you. Your education, your ambitions, your very self must be surrendered. This is death and rebirth. Are you certain? Sarah thought of the girl she'd been driven, ambitious, never satisfied. Then she thought of who she was becoming, grounded, purposeful, at peace. I understand, she said, and I'm certain. Then you may prepare for baptism, the bishop said. May God grant you strength for the journey. After class, people surrounded her, some offering cautious congratulations, others clearly skeptical. Rebecca hugged her tight, whispering prayers of joy. Annie Lapp shook her hand with something approaching respect. Jacob waited until the others had dispersed. When they were finally alone, he took her hands, propriety forgotten in the magnitude of the moment. You're sure? He asked, searching her face. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Sarah, his voice broke slightly. I need you to know if you do this, if you join us, I intend to court you properly, to marry you if you'll have me. But I need to know it's not why you're choosing baptism. Sarah reached up, touched his face gently. Jacob Yoder, I'm choosing baptism because this is where I belong. Because this faith, this life, this community calls to my soul. She smiled through her tears. The fact that it also includes you, that's God's grace, not my reason. He pulled her into his arms then, the first time he'd ever held her. Sarah felt the strength of him, the solidness, the promise of a life built on faith and work and love. In time, you'll give me sons, she whispered against his chest. God willing, he whispered back. God willing. 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah gave away her English clothes, her electronics, her car. Her parents helped, tears streaming as they packed up the remnants of her old life. The night before baptism, Sarah couldn't sleep. Tomorrow she would kneel before the community and make vows that would bind her forever. Tomorrow she would die to the world and be reborn into a new life. She stood at her window, looking out at the English world one last time. Streetlights and power lines, cars passing in the night, the glow of TVs in windows, all of it soon to be forbidden. Was she afraid? Yes. Was she sad? In some ways. But underneath it all was a peace so profound it took her breath away. This was right. This was her path. The morning of baptism dawned clear and bright. Sarah, dressed in the new clothes the women had helped her make, properly, plain now, nothing of the English about them. Her parents drove her to the Yoder farm, their faces set in determined acceptance. "We'll be here," her mother whispered. "Always. Whenever you need us." "I know." Sarah hugged them both. "I love you. Thank you for letting me go." The service was held outdoors, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. The entire community gathered. Hundreds of people come to witness this unprecedented event. Sarah knelt with the other candidates, Annie Lapp on one side, a young man named David on the other. Bishop Stoltzfors stood before them, his voice carrying across the fields. "Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God?" "Yes," Sarah answered, with the others. "Do you promise to live according to the Ordnung, to submit to the brotherhood, to remain faithful unto death?" "Yes." Water poured over her head, shockingly cold. Sarah gasped, felt it run down her face like tears. Or perhaps those were tears. It was hard to tell. "Rise, Sister Sarah," Bishop Stoltzfors said, and the title hit her like a physical blow. Sister. She was one of them now, truly, irreversibly, one of them. The community erupted in quiet joy. Women braced her. Men nodded approval. Her parents stood at the edge, tears streaming, but managing tremulous smiles. And then Jacob was there, standing before her in his Sabji best, his face shining with a joy she'd never seen before. "Sister Sarah," he said formally, "may I have permission to court you?" The words were traditional, expected, but the emotion behind them made Sarah's knees weak. "Yes, brother Jacob," she managed. "You may." The crowd dispersed for the baptismal meal. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Sarah moved through it all in a daze, accepting congratulations, helping serve, being folded into the community like she'd always belonged. As the sun set, she found herself standing where it all began, near the old Henderson barn. It had been torn down years ago, but Sarah could still see it in her mind's eye. Could still feel the weight of those beams, hear the storm, remember the moment Jacob had appeared like an answer to prayer. "Full circle," Jacob said, appearing beside her. "It seems impossible," Sarah said. "That little girl trapped in the storm, she could never have imagined this." "No," Jacob smiled. "I think she knew more than you credit. I think she recognized home when she saw it." Sarah leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. In the distance, buggies headed home in the gathering dusk. Oil lamps began to glow in windows. The Amish world settled into its evening rhythms, and Sarah was part of it now. "No regrets?" Jacob asked quietly. Sarah thought of the life she'd given up, the medical degree, the career, the modern conveniences. Then she looked at the man beside her, the community that had embraced her, the faith that had transformed her. "No regrets," she said firmly, "only gratitude." "And those sons?" Jacob's voice held gentle teasing, still willing to fulfill that prophecy. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the fields. "In God's time. But Jacob, yes, maybe we could start with just one." His laughter joined hers, and together they walked back toward the farm, toward their future, toward a life that had begun with a storm and a promise and led to this moment of perfect peace. The stars came out overhead, the same stars that had witnessed a frightened child and a young man speaking words he didn't understand. Now they shone on a woman who had found her path and a man who had waited half his life for her to find it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning to be a proper Amish wife, navigating her parents' continued presence in her life, building a home with Jacob, facing the reality of all she'd given up. But tonight, walking beside the man who'd saved her in more ways than one, surrounded by the community that had become her family, Sarah knew only contentment. She had chosen the harder path, the narrower way, and in choosing it had found a freedom she'd never known existed. Some would call her crazy, some would say she'd thrown away a brilliant future. But Sarah knew better. She'd traded a future that looked golden, but felt hollow, for one that looked plain, but felt like pure gold. And as Jacob took her hand, as they walked together into their new life, Sarah understood at last what those long-ago words had really meant. Not a prophecy, or a curse, or a binding, but a promise. A promise that sometimes God's plans come disguised as storms, that sometimes we have to be broken to be rebuilt, that sometimes the life we never imagined is the only one that could ever make us whole. In time, there would indeed be three strapping boys with their father's strength and their mother's determination, and daughters too, twin girls who would grow up to be midwives like their mother, bringing life into the world with skilled hands and faithful hearts. But that was still to come. For now there was just this, a man and woman walking home through an Amish evening, proof that love can bridge any gap if faith builds the foundation, and that sometimes the most extraordinary life is the one that looks utterly ordinary to those who don't understand that coming home is the greatest adventure of all.